Trash like you doesn't belong on the 12th floor, the head nurse declared, towering over 13-year-old Benjamin Turner as he stood outside the VIP suite window, her voice dripping with contempt that had been building for years of seeing people she deemed beneath this hospital's elite level. She jabbed her finger toward the glass behind her, making sure everyone within earshot understood the hierarchy being violated. That man lying in there is worth $5.3 billion, and Charles Whitfield is the most important patient this hospital has ever treated, so you need to understand that some security guard's disabled son has absolutely no right to stand here staring at him like some kind of spectacle. Before Benjamin could respond, she ripped the worn notebook from his trembling hands and hurled it down the pristine hallway with enough force to make her point clear. It slammed against the wall with a sound that echoed through the corridor, and pages exploded across the polished floor like wounded birds falling from the sky. Through the window behind the nurse's rigid form, Charles Whitfield's body convulsed violently on the hospital bed, his skin having turned an alarming shade of gray while his lips darkened to an ominous blue-purple. The heart monitor was shrieking in patterns that 15 years of medical training couldn't decipher, creating a symphony of alarm that filled the room with dread. 15 of the hospital's top doctors surrounded him in a tight circle of panic, their faces showing the kind of fear that only comes when expertise fails and death approaches, despite every intervention attempted. None of them had any idea what was systematically killing one of the most powerful men in pharmaceutical research. A man whose survival could mean millions in donations, and whose death could mean the end of careers. Except for the boy they had just dismissed and thrown out like garbage. The same boy who had been trying desperately to tell them exactly what was wrong. 3 hours earlier, the 12th floor had been transformed into a completely different world from the basement where most hospital workers spent their shifts. It was Christmas Eve, and the annual gala was in full swing with tickets that had cost $60,000 each, more money than Gerald Turner made in an entire year of night shifts. Champagne that cost more per bottle than a month's rent flowed freely among 200 guests, dressed in designer everything, their laughter echoing under crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than most people's houses. 12 floors below this spectacle of wealth and privilege, Benjamin Turner sat alone in a maintenance basement that perpetually smelled like mold mixed with burnt coffee, a space so far removed from the gala above that it might as well have been a different planet entirely. Charles Whitfield stood center stage in the ballroom, wearing a Tom Ford suit that had cost $12,000 and looking every inch the philanthropic billionaire. His Patek Philippe watches glinted under the carefully positioned lights, the 2 pieces on his wrist alone worth $250,000, more than many families would see in a lifetime. He raised a glass of Macallan that cost $800 per shot and delivered his carefully rehearsed lines with the practiced ease of someone who had given this same speech dozens of times before. Novartis Biosystems is incredibly proud to announce a $12 million commitment to pediatric cancer research, he declared, pausing perfectly for the wave of applause he knew would come. He smiled for the cameras that were capturing this moment of apparent generosity, his expression radiating benevolence. Because at Novartis, we believe with every fiber of our being that every child deserves a fighting chance at life. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause, and Charles soaked it all in with the satisfaction of a performance well executed. What none of them knew, what the cameras would never capture, was that earlier that same afternoon, he had personally killed research into 3 rare diseases without a second thought. The patient populations were too small, the markets insufficient, the return on investment negative. It was just business, nothing personal. At exactly 10:40 that evening, Charles felt something distinctly off beginning in his stomach, a flutter that didn't belong there. Mild nausea began creeping up his throat, making the champagne taste wrong. He mentioned it briefly to his personal assistant and then laughed it off with practiced ease, blaming it on too much rich food and the stress of hosting such an important event. 12 floors down in the forgotten basement, Benjamin suddenly closed the medical textbook he'd been reading with an abruptness that made his father look up from the security monitors. "Dad," his voice emerged quiet and careful, the way it always did when he was processing something important. "There's a smell coming through the ventilation system, something that doesn't belong here." Gerald Turner looked up from the bank of security monitors that showed every corner of the hospital's vast complex. "What kind of smell are you talking about, Ben?" "It's coming from the elevator shaft, carried down through the ventilation system," Benjamin explained, his hands beginning to shake in that particular way that happened when his senses detected something fundamentally wrong with the world around him. "It's a chemical smell, exactly like the one from the research lab where Mom used to work before she got sick. Someone upstairs is very ill, Dad, seriously ill." Gerald frowned with the kind of concern that came from years of learning to trust his son's unusual perceptions. "Ben, you can't possibly smell something from 12 floors up." "I can smell it clearly, Dad," Benjamin interrupted, his eyes remaining fixed on the notebook in his lap, specifically on page 2863, the chapter he had been reading obsessively for 3 days straight. The hospital's ventilation system carries every scent throughout the building, and metabolic acidosis has a very distinct smell that most people can't detect. It's sweet, but fundamentally wrong, like fruit that's rotting from the inside out. Gerald had learned over the years not to question his son's extraordinary senses, even when they seemed impossible. Benjamin couldn't tie his own shoes without getting frustrated to the point of tears, couldn't hold a normal conversation without staring intently at the floor, but he could smell things, hear things, and see patterns in the world that simply didn't exist for neurotypical people. "It's probably nothing serious," Gerald said, though his gut instinct was already disagreeing with his words. By 11:15, Charles Whitfield's mild discomfort had evolved into something that could no longer be dismissed or laughed away. Sharp pains were radiating through his abdomen like something was systematically tearing him apart from the inside, and no amount of antacids or deep breathing was making any difference. By 11:40, he was lying on a gurney being rushed through the hospital corridors into the most expensive VIP suite the hospital offered, surrounded by staff who were trying desperately not to show their panic. In the basement, Benjamin's head suddenly snapped up from his book, and he found himself staring intensely at security monitor 12, which showed the 12th floor in grainy black and white. Doctors were flooding into a room with the kind of organized chaos that happens when someone critically important is dying despite every effort to save them. "That's him," Benjamin whispered, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "That's the person I've been smelling." "Who are you talking about?" Gerald asked, already moving toward his son. "The person with the metabolic acidosis smell, the one whose scent has been coming through the vents." Benjamin's voice cracked with the weight of recognition. "Dad, he's showing exactly the same pattern, the exact same progression." The room seemed to go cold as understanding dawned. "What pattern, Ben? What are you seeing?" "Mom's pattern," Benjamin said simply, and those two words contained 3 years of grief and study. "He's dying exactly the way Mom died." The room went cold with the weight of memory. 3 years ago, September 22nd, Sarah Turner had been admitted to the 8th floor of this very same hospital. She'd made 4 ER visits in just 2 weeks, each time describing the same symptoms. Abdominal pain that felt like knives, nausea that wouldn't stop, weakness so profound she'd collapse during her janitorial shift while cleaning one of the research labs. Every single time, they had sent her home with dismissive diagnoses that explained nothing. Gastritis, they'd said first, then irritable bowel syndrome, then anxiety, as if the pain was something she was imagining. One doctor, Gerald would never forget his face or his condescending tone, had actually written drug-seeking behavior in her chart, implying she was faking illness to get prescription medications. She had died after 18 hours of screaming in agony that doctors continued to insist was psychosomatic, that existed only in her mind. Weeks later, when the autopsy results finally came back, they revealed the truth. Acute intermittent porphyria, a disease so rare that only 1 in 100,000 people would ever develop it. So rare that most doctors went their entire careers without ever seeing a single case. If someone had known what to look for, if someone had ordered a $50 test, if someone had simply listened to what she was saying instead of dismissing her as hysterical or drug-seeking, she would still be alive. Gerald remembered that last terrible night with clarity that hadn't faded even slightly. Sarah's hand had been clasped in Benjamin's small fingers, her voice barely rising above a whisper as she said, "I love you most, baby." more than anything in this world. Then the seizure had begun, the violent convulsions that doctors insisted were dramatic behavior designed to get attention. Benjamin had been only 10 years old at the time. He hadn't cried at the funeral, hadn't shed a single tear since that night, had just started reading with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Medical journals stolen from trash cans, textbooks found in hospital dumpsters, case studies that researchers had discarded, he consumed them all. "I could have saved her," he would whisper at 3 a.m. when the tears finally came in the darkness of his room. "If I had known then what I know now, if I had understood the patterns, I could have saved Mom's life." Gerald looked at his son now, 13 years old, wearing a hoodie he'd worn for 3 days straight, unable to meet anyone's eyes directly. The world called him broken, damaged, someone to be pitied or ignored. But those eyes that couldn't make contact saw absolutely everything. "I need to go up there right now," Benjamin stated with sudden urgency. "That man is going to die, Dad, exactly like Mom did, and they don't know what's causing it. But I do. I know exactly what's wrong. Ben, you can't just walk into— He's going to die, and they won't know how to stop it," Benjamin interrupted, his hands clutching the notebook that had become his constant companion. "But I have proof right here in my notebook. The case study they threw away 8 years ago. The research from Novaris that could have saved Mom if anyone had paid attention." Gerald's throat tightened painfully as understanding crashed over him. If they could somehow save this man, this rich, powerful man who had probably never looked twice at people like them, then maybe Sarah's death would finally mean something. Maybe she would smile from wherever she was now, knowing that her suffering had prevented someone else's. "Okay," Gerald said, making a decision that would change everything. "Let's go save a life." They ran for the elevator with a desperation that comes from knowing death is racing against you. Gerald's security badge was barely authorized for floors above 11, but he swiped it anyway, praying it would work. The elevator lurched upward with agonizing slowness, each floor marker another reminder of time slipping away. The floors ticked by with excruciating slowness. 7, 8, 9, each number a reminder of his mother's final hours. Benjamin's breathing was coming too fast. The fluorescent lights overhead were far too bright for his sensitive eyes, and he was stimming, fingers tapping against his leg in that rhythmic pattern that helped him manage overwhelming sensory input. 10, 11, 12. The elevator doors finally slid open with a soft chime that seemed obscenely cheerful. A doctor stood directly in front of them, blocking their path like a wall of professional authority. He was older, with gray hair perfectly styled and expensive glasses that probably cost more than Gerald's monthly salary. Gerald recognized him instantly, and his stomach turned with the recognition. Dr. Richard Hayes, the physician who had written drug-seeking behavior in Sarah's file, the man who had let her die because he was too arrogant to consider that he might be wrong. Hayes looked at Gerald's security uniform with the kind of thinly veiled contempt that came from a lifetime of believing some people were simply worth more than others. "You work in the basement, don't you, Turner? What exactly are you doing on the VIP floor?" Benjamin gripped his father's hand tightly and whispered so quietly that only Gerald could hear the words. "They won't believe me, Dad. They never believe people like me. But I have proof in my pocket, the memo that shows what really killed Mom." Dr. Richard Hayes remained standing in the elevator doorway like an immovable barrier of professional authority and class prejudice. "I asked you a question, Turner. What are you doing on this floor?" Gerald's badge told the whole story in a single glance. Security officer, night shift, employee number 3891, someone who belonged in basements and service corridors, not on floors where billionaires received treatment. "There's a medical emergency happening, and my son knows exactly what's wrong with—" "Your son," Hayes interrupted, his smile cold enough to freeze water. "The one who dropped out of middle school because he couldn't function in a normal classroom environment. That son." His eyes flicked briefly to Benjamin and then away, as if the boy wasn't worth sustained attention. "Mr. Turner, I have 30 years of medical experience and training. I attended Johns Hopkins Medical School and completed my residency at Massachusetts General. Are you seriously trying to tell me that your 13-year-old dropout son knows something that I don't?" Each word landed like a physical blow, designed to remind them of their place in the hospital's rigid hierarchy. Benjamin's hands were shaking more violently now, and the fluorescent lights seemed to be getting brighter and more painful with each passing second. Gerald recognized the signs immediately. In less than 2 minutes, his son would shut down completely, retreating into himself where nothing could reach him. "Please, Dr. Hayes, just let him look at the patient for 1 minute." "Absolutely not," Hayes declared with finality. "We don't allow children with special needs to wander into critical care situations where they could interfere with actual medical treatment." Through the gap beside Hayes's rigid form, Gerald could see directly into the VIP suite. Charles Whitfield was seizing violently on the bed, his body arching impossibly despite the restraints holding him down. The machines surrounding him were screaming their various alarms, creating a cacophony of imminent death. 14 doctors surrounded the bed, shouting over each other in escalating panic, throwing out diagnoses and treatments with increasing desperation. "Lipase levels are completely normal. This isn't pancreatitis. CT scan shows no evidence of aortic dissection. Could this be some kind of toxin exposure?" Toxicology screen came back completely clean. They were drowning in their own expertise, throwing every treatment they knew at shadows and ghosts, while the real cause remained invisible to them. Benjamin stood perfectly still, staring through the window with an intensity that suggested he was seeing far more than just a dying man. His lips moved silently, counting something that only he could perceive. "I've seen this exact progression before," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Hayes heard despite the noise and turned sharply. "You've seen what, exactly?" "The way his body is moving, the specific pattern of writhing. That's visceral neuropathic pain, not regular pain." Benjamin pointed at the catheter bag hanging beside the bed. "Look at his urine color. It's port wine, a very specific shade. That's not blood contamination, that's porphobilinogen accumulation." Hayes actually blinked in surprise. "What did you just say?" "Acute intermittent porphyria," Benjamin stated with absolute certainty. "And you're giving him barbiturates. I can see the IV bag from here. It's phenobarbital. Barbiturates are one of the primary triggers for porphyria attacks. Every dose you give him is actively killing him faster." The silence that followed was absolute and crushing. "Porphyria occurs in 1 out of every 100,000 people," Hayes began, his voice uncertain for the first time. "The statistical probability of encountering it is—" "My mother had it," Benjamin interrupted, his voice going completely flat and factual, the way it did when he was stating irrefutable truth. "She died on the 8th floor of this hospital exactly 3 years ago, September 22nd. You were her attending physician, Dr. Hayes. You wrote drug-seeking behavior in her chart. You told her the pain was anxiety and stress. You sent her home 4 separate times while she was dying." Benjamin's voice didn't waver even slightly as he continued. 18 hours after you sent her home the 4th time, she was dead on our bathroom floor." Every trace of color drained from Hayes's face as memory crashed over him. "I see hundreds of patients every month. I can't possibly remember every individual case." "Sarah Turner," Benjamin continued relentlessly, "employee number 4126, janitor in the research wing, 35 years old when she died." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket with trembling hands, the document old and worn, photocopied so many times it was barely legible in places. But the Novartis Biosystems logo remained perfectly clear at the top. The date read March 15th, 2017. Gerald had never seen this document before in his life, and he stared at it in shock. "What exactly is that?" Hayes demanded, his professional authority crumbling. "It's an internal research memorandum from Novartis Biosystems," Benjamin explained, unfolding it with meticulous care. "They wanted to develop enzyme replacement therapy for acute intermittent porphyria. The project was budgeted at $8.5 million over 5 years. It could have saved approximately 2,000 lives globally and taught an entire generation of doctors how to recognize and treat this disease." He pointed to the signature line at the bottom of the document, where the project's fate had been sealed. "Project terminated. Market too small. ROI negative." The signature read, "Charles Whitfield, CEO." "The man who's dying in that room right now?" Benjamin's voice cracked with emotion he could no longer contain. He personally killed the research that could have saved my mother's life. He buried it because the patient population wasn't profitable enough for his shareholders. Hayes stood frozen, unable to process what he was hearing. Gerald's throat was so tight he could barely breathe. "Ben, where did you get that document?" "From the trash on the 3rd floor 8 years ago," Benjamin said simply. "Someone threw away all the terminated project files after the board meeting. I kept them, all 12 research projects, 12 different rare diseases, all of them buried for profit." A desperate shout came from inside the suite, cutting through their conversation. "He's crashing! Heart rate dropping below 40! Get the crash cart in here now!" The alarm screamed even louder, the sound of death approaching rapidly. Hayes looked at the memo in his hands, then at the dying billionaire visible through the window, then at the boy he had dismissed just seconds ago as irrelevant. "If you're wrong about this diagnosis, I'm not wrong," Benjamin said with absolute certainty. "I've studied this disease every single day for 3 years. I know every symptom, every diagnostic test, every treatment protocol. I know it better than anyone in that room because they read about it once in medical school and then forgot it existed. I learned it by watching my mother scream in agony while you told her she was imagining the whole thing." The machines were continuous alarms now, the unmistakable sound of death approaching with certainty. Hayes closed his eyes and made the choice that would save a life. "You have 2 minutes. If you're wasting our time, I won't waste a single second," Benjamin promised, already moving forward. Benjamin stopped at the window and pressed both hands against the glass, his reflection showing a determination that belied his 13 years. "I need someone to get me a Woods lamp immediately. Ultraviolet light, 365 nanometers," he stated with clinical precision. "And run a Watson-Schwartz test on his urine right now. 2 milliliters of urine, 2 milliliters of Ehrlich's reagent. If it turns cherry red, that's your definitive diagnosis. Do it immediately." Hayes stared at Benjamin for one more long second, seeing something he'd missed before, then opened the door to the suite. The boy everyone had dismissed walked into a room full of doctors who had spent entire careers ignoring people exactly like him. All 15 doctors turned simultaneously, and the room went silent except for the machines and Charles Whitfield's labored breathing as he continued dying. Benjamin stood in the doorway, 13 years old, wearing a worn hoodie, clutching his notebook like a lifeline, with Gerald standing protectively behind him. Dr. Susan Miller was the first to speak, her voice sharp with indignation. "Who authorized them to be in here?" Hayes stepped forward with newfound conviction. "The boy knows the diagnosis when none of us could figure it out." Nervous laughter rippled through the room, dismissive and uncomfortable. Dr. James Cooper didn't even try to hide his contempt for the situation. "We have 15 physicians in this room with a combined 200 years of medical experience, and you're telling us a middle school dropout has solved this?" Benjamin walked directly to the bedside without asking for permission, his focus entirely on the dying man before him. Whitfield's skin had turned the color of concrete, gray and lifeless. His lips were a disturbing shade of purple-black, and his body was convulsing despite the restraints holding him down. The heart monitor was wailing in absolute chaos, dropping to 40 beats per minute in a ragged gasp, then suddenly spiking to 190 like a scream of agony, then down to 60, then up to 150, no discernible pattern except the steady approach of flatline. "Don't you dare touch him!" Miller snapped with protective fury. Benjamin didn't touch the patient, just observed with systematic intensity. His eyes moved methodically across every visible detail: face, hands, IV lines, catheter bag, monitoring equipment. "Port wine-colored urine, approximately 400 milliliters collected," he stated clinically. "That's not blood contamination." "We already checked for blood in the urine," a young resident offered. "You checked for red blood cells," Benjamin corrected. "I'm talking about porphobilinogen, which requires a completely different test." Benjamin pointed at Whitfield's exposed hands with precision. "Notice the photosensitivity. The left hand is significantly darker than the right under these fluorescent lights, indicating abnormal porphyrin accumulation in the skin." Several doctors leaned in closer, squinting. One nodded slowly. "There is a visible difference in pigmentation." "The seizure pattern is wrong for standard epilepsy," Benjamin continued. "This isn't grand mal or any brain-based seizure disorder." This is peripheral neuropathy causing nerve damage throughout his body, not originating in his brain. Anti-epileptic medications won't work because you're treating the wrong system. Cooper frowned deeply. The MRI showed his brain, which is functioning normally. Benjamin interrupted. This is attacking his peripheral nervous system. There are 5 distinct symptoms presenting simultaneously: visceral neuropathic pain, autonomic tachycardia, peripheral nerve seizures, photosensitivity, and port wine urine. He paused for emphasis, letting the pattern sink in. Only one diagnosis in medical literature fits all 5 symptoms occurring together. Which is? Hayes asked carefully, already knowing the answer would change everything. Acute intermittent porphyria, Benjamin stated with absolute confidence. A heavy silence settled over the room like a physical weight. That occurs in 1 out of every 100,000 people, Miller said slowly. We might see 1 case per decade in a hospital this size. Then explain why you're actively missing it, Benjamin said, opening his notebook to reveal pages of careful handwriting and detailed diagrams. And worse, you're administering medications that are actively worsening his condition. He pointed directly at the IV pole with its hanging bags. Phenobarbital and morphine. Both are highly porphyrinogenic drugs. They trigger the enzyme deficiency cascade. Every single dose you've given him is killing him exponentially faster. Cooper stared in disbelief. How could you possibly know our exact medication regimen? I can read the labels from here, and I can see the effects in his deterioration pattern, Benjamin explained. He crashed 40 minutes ago, immediately after you started the barbiturate infusion. Check your timeline documentation. Hayes pulled out his tablet and scrolled rapidly through the medical record, his face going pale. He's absolutely correct. Absolutely. Patient crashed at 12:18 a.m., precisely when we initiated the phenobarbital. What would you suggest we do? Miller asked, her earlier edge completely gone. Stop the barbiturates immediately. Stop the morphine. Administer hemin intravenously at 3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. It's the only treatment that can reverse the porphyrin cascade once it's started. We don't stock hemin in this hospital, Cooper stated. You're a research hospital with an active transplant unit, Benjamin countered. Check your pharmacy for penhematin. It should be cataloged at 313 milligrams per vial. Hayes was already calling down to pharmacy. This is Dr. Hayes. Check inventory for penhematin immediately. You have it in stock? He looked genuinely shocked. 6 vials available. Prepare 1 vial for immediate infusion, Benjamin instructed. But confirm the diagnosis first before starting treatment. I need a Woods lamp. What are you talking about? An ultraviolet lamp, 365 nanometer wavelength, Benjamin clarified. My dad has one on his security belt. Gerald immediately pulled out a UV flashlight designed for crime scene investigation, for detecting biological evidence. Benjamin took it carefully and walked to the catheter bag. Someone dimmed the lights completely. Miller nodded to a resident who hit the switch. The room plunged into darkness, with only the glow of monitors providing illumination. Benjamin clicked the UV flashlight on and held it against the urine collection bag. The liquid inside exploded into brilliant fluorescent pink, glowing like radioactive material under the ultraviolet light. Every doctor in the room gasped audibly, and some actually stepped back involuntarily. Porphobilinogen fluorescence under UV light, Benjamin said quietly into the darkness. This is pathognomonic for porphyria. Absolutely definitive proof. The lights came back on, harsh and revealing. The doctors stood staring at the bag as if it had betrayed them, the answer having been there the entire time, invisible to their trained eyes. We still need Watson-Schwartz confirmation, Hayes said, though his voice had grown smaller with humility. 2 milliliters of urine mixed with 2 milliliters of Ehrlich's reagent will turn cherry red if positive, Benjamin recited. But look at the monitor. You don't have time for confirmation. Look at what's happening. Whitfield was actively crashing before their eyes, the heart rate plummeting in the monitor's frantic screech. 120, 100, 80, 70, 60, 50, 42, each beep marking another step toward death. He's coding right now, Miller shouted in alarm. Start the hemin infusion immediately. Benjamin's voice cut through the panic with absolute authority. If you code him without stopping the porphyrin cascade, he'll arrest again within 10 minutes. Hemin stops the attack at its source. Hayes made his decision in that moment. Get the Panhematin. 313 milligrams IV push. Do it now. We don't have confirmed diagnosis yet, someone protested. Do it now! Hayes's voice cracked through the room. Hang the hem in or this man dies in less than 60 seconds. The nurses moved with practiced efficiency, and a runner sprinted from the room. 90 seconds later, she returned with the vial containing dark amber liquid worth $10,000. They drew it up, mixed it with saline, hung the IV bag, and started the infusion while everyone held their breath. Everyone in the room watched with barely contained hope. 30 seconds passed, 40 seconds, 50. Whitfield's heart rate began to stabilize, slowly climbing back from the edge of death. 65, 75, 85, 90, holding steady at a normal rhythm. His breathing pattern began to even out, becoming less labored with each passing moment. The seizures gradually slowed, then stopped completely, his body finally relaxing. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes of sustained improvement. The alarms began to quiet one by one until the room was almost peaceful. Whitfield's skin began to shift color, transforming from deathly gray to pale to something approaching human flesh tones. Miller checked his pupils with her penlight. Reactive and equal, he's genuinely stabilizing. The entire room seemed to exhale collectively, releasing breath they hadn't realized they were holding. Hayes turned to Benjamin, whose hands were still shaking as the adrenaline began to fade from his system. How did you know all of this? Hayes asked, with genuine wonder. Benjamin closed the notebook with trembling fingers, his voice cracking with emotion. I watched my mother die of this exact disease, right here in this hospital 3 years ago. Same symptoms, same machines beeping her life away. I promised myself at her funeral, never again. Never would I let someone die like that if I could prevent it. His gaze locked onto Whitfield's unconscious face, the man whose signature had killed research that could have saved his mother, who had buried 12 different projects because the patients weren't profitable enough to matter. A bitter sound escaped his throat, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Even someone like him gets to live when my mother didn't. 40 minutes later, Charles Whitfield's eyes slowly opened, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. He looked confused and disoriented, the way people do when their body has been through a war they don't remember fighting. A nurse leaned over him gently. Mr. Whitfield, can you hear me? You're at Sterling Heights Medical Institute. You experienced a severe medical emergency, but you're stable now. Memory came in fragments. The gala, champagne, sudden tearing pain, then drowning in darkness. What happened to me? His voice was raw and painful. Dr. Hayes stepped into his line of sight. You suffered an attack of acute intermittent porphyria, an extremely rare genetic disorder, approximately 1 case in 100,000 people. Whitfield's eyes moved slowly around the room, taking in the 15 doctors who represented the absolute best his money could buy. Then his gaze landed on someone completely unexpected, a teenage boy in a worn hoodie, standing in the corner beside a man wearing a security guard uniform. Who are they and why are they in my room? Whitfield asked with confusion. Hayes hesitated, choosing his words carefully. That's Benjamin Turner and his father Gerald. Gerald works security here on the night shift. That doesn't explain why they're in my private room. Heavy silence filled the space before Hayes continued. Benjamin diagnosed your condition when none of us could figure it out, Mr. Whitfield. Whitfield stared in disbelief. That's a child. He's 13 years old, dropped out of 7th grade, and taught himself medicine from textbooks and medical journals he found in this hospital's trash bins, Hayes explained. He saved your life when 15 of the top doctors in this region couldn't identify what was killing you. Whitfield's face showed a mixture of confusion and growing anger. You're telling me a middle school dropout saved your life, yes, Hayes confirmed, then handed him the folded memo that Benjamin had been carrying. He wanted you to see this document. Whitfield unfolded it with shaking hands, and his face went white as recognition dawned. Novaris Biosystems letterhead, his company, March 15th, 2017. The proposal for porphyria research, $8.5 million over 5 years that could save 2,000 lives globally. His own signature at the bottom, sealing its fate. Project terminated, market too small, ROI negative. The paper trembled violently in his hands. "Where did you get this?" Benjamin spoke quietly from the corner. "From a trash bin on the third-floor research wing 8 years ago. Someone threw away all the terminated project files after the board meeting, and I collected them." Whitfield looked at the boy, really seeing him for the first time. "You've been keeping this all these years?" "Yes, sir," Benjamin confirmed, along with 11 other similar memos. 12 rare disease research proposals canceled between 2016 and 2020, all because the patient populations were too small for your company to make sufficient profit. Whitfield's throat felt like it was closing. "That's just business. We can't possibly fund every research project that comes across our desk. My mother died of porphyria." Benjamin cut him off, his voice flat and emotionless. "September 22nd, 3 years ago, right here on the 8th floor of this hospital. She came to the emergency room 4 times in 2 weeks with escalating symptoms. Nobody knew what was wrong with her. Nobody ran the right diagnostic test. She died screaming in agony." Complete silence descended on the room like a physical presence. The autopsy confirmed it weeks later. Acute intermittent porphyria, the exact same disease you just survived. Benjamin continued, his eyes dry because 3 years of tears had already been shed. "If your company hadn't terminated that research, maybe doctors would have known how to recognize it. Maybe medical schools would have taught more than a single paragraph about it. Maybe my mother would still be alive today." Whitfield felt like he'd been punched directly through the chest, the air leaving his lungs. "I didn't mean to kill anyone specifically." "You didn't mean to kill her specifically, that's true," Benjamin agreed, his tone remaining flat and factual. "You meant to maximize shareholder value and return on investment. 12 research projects, 12 different rare diseases. How many people died because they weren't profitable enough for you to care about?" Hayes stepped forward to add context. "Benjamin has personally documented 216 rare disease misdiagnoses at this hospital alone. 58 different conditions. 91% of them were initially diagnosed incorrectly because doctors aren't adequately trained, because pharmaceutical companies don't fund the research, because patients like Sarah Turner aren't considered worth the investment." Whitfield stared at the memo, at his own signature, at the decision he'd made without ever considering the human cost. Somewhere a woman had died because of this choice, and her son had saved his life anyway, despite having every reason not to. "Why?" His voice cracked with emotion. "Why would you save me after what I did?" Benjamin was quiet for a long moment before answering. "My mother taught me that every life has inherent value, even yours, even the lives of people who don't see that value in others." He looked directly at Whitfield, forcing eye contact despite how much it cost him. "I didn't save you because you deserved it. I saved you because she would have wanted me to. Letting you die wouldn't have brought her back. It would just make me like you, someone who decides which lives are worth saving based on their perceived value to society." The words hit Whitfield like physical blows, each one landing with devastating accuracy. 2 hours later, at 2:30 in the morning on Christmas Day, Charles Whitfield sat up in his hospital bed, still weak but with his mind completely clear for the first time in hours. He looked at the memo again, at his signature from 8 years ago that had condemned Sarah Turner to death. Then he looked at Benjamin, the boy who had saved him despite everything. "I need my phone immediately," Whitfield said with sudden urgency. Hayes frowned with concern. "Mr. Whitfield, it's 2:30 in the morning. Wake up every member of my board of directors. Emergency meeting at 6 a.m. sharp. Christmas morning, I don't care," Whitfield ordered. "Tell them attendance is mandatory." He began making calls, his voice growing stronger with each conversation. The first went to his legal team. "I need 3 documents drafted immediately. First, establishment of a perpetual research fund, $50 million annually with no sunset clause. Second, comprehensive scholarship program with full funding. Third, public statement, title it an apology and a commitment." He dictated directly, his words carrying the weight of transformation. 8 years ago, I personally terminated 12 rare disease research projects because the patient populations were too small to generate acceptable return on investment. I was fundamentally wrong. Tonight, I nearly died of porphyria, saved not by 15 elite physicians, but by a 13-year-old boy who taught himself medicine from journals my own company threw away as garbage. a boy whose mother died of the same disease because I chose profit over research that could have saved her life. He looked at the doctors and at Benjamin with absolute conviction. Effective immediately, Noveris Biosystems establishes the Sarah Turner Rare Disease Fund, $50 million per year in perpetuity, with no return on investment requirements whatsoever. Pure research into diseases that Big Pharma systematically ignores because the patient populations are too small to be profitable. Benjamin's hands tightened involuntarily, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. Second, the Benjamin Turner Medical Scholarship Program. Full funding for students the traditional educational system has failed. Students with autism, dyslexia, ADHD, students who learn differently but possess the ability to see patterns others consistently miss. Benjamin will be our first scholar, and we'll build an entire alternative pathway to medical practice around exceptional minds like his. Gerald's arm wrapped protectively around his son's shoulders, both of them struggling to process this moment. Third, complete transparency in all research decisions. Every project proposal will be made public. Every termination will be documented with full justification. No more buried research, no more forgotten patients. Whitfield looked directly at Benjamin with something approaching reverence. If this boy could forgive me enough to save my life when he had every reason to let me die, then I can spend the rest of mine making absolutely certain that no one else dies because I was too blind to see their value. He ended the call and looked at the assembled doctors. Send that statement to every major media outlet. I want it published by noon today. Dr. Brooks stepped forward with sudden inspiration. Mr. Whitfield, Benjamin needs more than just a scholarship. He needs a role here right now, today. What are you proposing? Create a rare disease consult service at this hospital immediately with Benjamin as the lead diagnostic consultant, Brooks suggested boldly. Hayes raised an eyebrow skeptically. He's 13 years old with no medical degree, no formal training. This hospital, with all its expertise and resources, almost let a billionaire die on Christmas Eve. Brooks interrupted sharply. A 13-year-old boy with a notebook full of discarded research saved him. I think our traditional credentialing requirements might need reconsideration. She turned to Benjamin directly. You would work alongside us as a genuine colleague, not as some curiosity or token. We handle the legal aspects of patient care. You provide the pattern recognition and diagnostic insight we clearly lack. A true partnership between different kinds of expertise. Benjamin looked overwhelmed, his hands beginning to shake. I can't possibly... You already did, Miller interjected. Tonight you identified a 1 in 100,000 disease in minutes when we were completely lost. You predicted the CIDH complication before the lab results even came back. You know more about rare diseases than most specialists will learn in their entire careers. Cooper nodded in agreement. You have 3 solid years of intensive study on diseases we learned about once in medical school and then promptly forgot because we never expected to see them. You possess pattern recognition abilities we simply don't have. You saved a life tonight, and that's a qualification that matters more than any diploma. Benjamin looked at Gerald, seeking guidance and permission. Gerald smiled genuinely for the first time in what felt like years. Your mother would be so incredibly proud of you, Ben. She'd want you to help people, to make absolutely certain that no one else dies invisible and forgotten the way she did. Benjamin nodded slowly, accepting the weight of this responsibility. Okay, but I need something in return, Mr. Whitfield. Name it. Anything. Complete access to your terminated research files, all of them without exception, Benjamin stated. Every canceled project, every abandoned drug development, every disease you decided wasn't worth studying. I want to see everything. Whitfield swallowed hard. That's going to be a very long list. I know exactly how long it is, and I want to study all of it, Benjamin insisted. There are patterns in what gets terminated, in who gets systematically left behind. I want to analyze those patterns and make absolutely certain we don't repeat the same mistakes. You'll have complete, unrestricted access to everything. Benjamin pulled out his worn notebook. Then I want to transform this into something much bigger. A national database of every rare disease case, every misdiagnosis, every missed opportunity, completely crowdsourced. Let patients submit their own stories, let doctors search it freely, make it available to everyone, comprehensive and completely free. Brooks was already pulling out her phone excitedly. I know researchers at Johns Hopkins and Stanford who would jump at the chance to help build this. We could have a working prototype within 6 months. Call them today. Whitfield ordered. "Whatever resources this project needs, it gets. No questions, no budget limitations." 6 months later, Sterling Heights Medical Institute looked fundamentally different now. The third-floor research wing, the area that used to house trash bins full of terminated projects and forgotten dreams, had been completely transformed into the Rare Disease Consult Center. Benjamin Turner sat at a desk covered with medical journals, case files, and 3 large monitors streaming real-time data from the national database they had built. He was 16 now, still wearing his signature hoodies, still unable to make easy eye contact, still occasionally overwhelmed by crowds and bright lights. But he was also the chief diagnostic consultant, a title that carried real weight and authority. The door opened and Dr. Emily Brooks entered with a young resident trailing behind her. "Benjamin, we have a challenging case. 28-year-old female presenting with 6 months of progressive muscle weakness, particularly severe after any physical exertion. Creatine kinase levels are completely normal, and the EMG results were inconclusive." Benjamin looked up from his current research. "Exercise intolerance with normal CK levels. What other symptoms are presenting?" "Intermittent double vision that comes and goes, drooping eyelids that worsen significantly by evening, and all symptoms show marked improvement with rest," Brooks listed. Benjamin was already typing, pulling up the database that had grown from his original 216 cases to over 4,000 documented rare disease presentations. "Myasthenia gravis with an atypical presentation pattern. Run an acetylcholine receptor antibody test immediately. If that comes back negative, test for MuSK antibodies. Approximately 15% of MG patients are seronegative for AChR, but test positive for MuSK." Brooks smiled with satisfaction. "We already ordered the AChR test and it came back negative. Then order the MuSK antibody test right away. Also get a chest CT to check for thymoma. About 10% of myasthenia gravis patients have thymic tumors that need to be identified and addressed." The resident was writing frantically, trying to capture every detail. "How do you know all of this so readily?" the resident asked with genuine curiosity. Benjamin shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "I read extensively and I remember what I read. That's all." Brooks looked at the resident with pride. "Benjamin has successfully diagnosed 43 rare disease cases in just 6 months. 43 patients who would have been misdiagnosed or missed entirely under our traditional approach." She looked at Benjamin with deep respect and gratitude. "He saved more lives in half a year than most physicians save in their entire careers." After they left, Benjamin returned to his current project, developing comprehensive training modules for medical students. Video lectures, animated flowcharts, interactive case studies, everything he had painstakingly taught himself, now packaged so that others could learn without having to dig through trash bins the way he had. His phone buzzed with a text from Gerald. "So proud of you, son. See you at dinner tonight. Your favorite, pizza." Benjamin smiled, small but genuine. Things with his father were significantly better now, though not perfect. Gerald still didn't fully understand everything about Benjamin's autism, still occasionally pushed too hard for normal behavior and responses, but he was genuinely trying, actively learning, consistently showing up, and that was enough. 3 years later, the Sarah Turner Rare Disease Fund had successfully funded 49 different research projects. The Benjamin Turner Medical Scholarship had graduated 89 students who learned differently, but saw patterns others missed. The Rare Disease Database had helped diagnose over 2,000 cases worldwide, saving lives across 6 continents. At 19 years old, Benjamin Turner became the youngest person ever awarded the prestigious Lasker Prize for Medical Innovation, recognizing his transformative contribution to medicine. He still wore hoodies to every formal event. He still struggled with direct eye contact. He still got overwhelmed in large crowds and needed quiet spaces to recover. But he saw what others consistently missed. And because of that extraordinary gift, thousands of people who would have died invisible and forgotten were alive, were seen, were remembered. For Sarah Turner, who cleaned floors but raised a genius. For Gerald Turner, who learned that difference isn't the same as broken. For every rare disease patient who has ever been told they don't matter, that they're too expensive, too complicated, too rare to be worth saving. You matter. You are seen. You are valued. This story is dedicated to you.